Welcome, everyone. Since we met last week, we've had 5 people add themselves to our group. I just thought I would mention who they are. Leslie Cole, who actually attended last time but wasn't sure she was on the list, from Ottawa. Elsie Sharma from Panchgani, and I presume a relative, Chainroop Sharma, also from Panchgani. So Eva is really selling us hard over there, obviously. Lisa Russell, I introduced you to her a few minutes ago, and Pageman Ayubzadeh from Ottawa. So welcome to you all. It's great to have you here. So tonight, I call each of these classes by a different name. This particular one is called Searching for His Soul. I want to talk first about the relationship with Freud. Jung's first encounter with Freud came in 1900 when his boss, Eugene Bleuler, asked him to review Freud's new book, The Interpretation of Dreams. At that point in his career, Jung found parts of it difficult to understand. It wasn't until he read it a second time in 1903 that he realized Freud was confirming his own findings concerning the presence of hidden psychological complexes within his patients. Jung had discovered them through his groundbreaking work with association tests, which we talked about last time. So I am now going to hopefully share. Just a minute. I think I have to turn off the
Mark, yeah, I'm just wondering if you should turn off your computer's bingo. Yeah.
There we go. Okay. Great. So here's a map, if you like, of where Jung was living in Basel in Switzerland, over here with the big B. And the A over here is Vienna, where Freud was living. So Jung traveled the 600 kilometers from Zurich to Vienna on March 3rd, 1907, to meet Freud for the first time face to face. Given their respective ages, Jung was 31, while Freud was 50. It may come as something of a surprise to learn that Jung's international reputation was grander than Freud's. Freud actually needed the recognition of Jung and his colleagues in Zurich. In fact, Jung was taking a large risk by associating himself with someone on the fringes of academic respectability. So we're going to need lots of volunteers tonight. And I'm hoping that now that I can see people's pictures, I can actually see raised hands. Linda has raised her hand. She's going to read the first one. Thank you very much.
Reading number 1. At that time, I was planning an academic career and was about to complete a work that would advance me in the university. Freud, definitely persona non grata in the medical world at that time, was hardly mentioned above a whisper by people of importance. At the congresses, he was discussed only in the couloir, the lobbies, never on the floor, and any connection with him was a menace to one's own reputation. Therefore, the discovery by me that my experiments in association were directly connected with Freud's theories was most unwelcome.
Okay, thank you. So they came together because of Jung's 1906 publication, Studies in Word Association. However, even at this first meeting, Jung came away with mixed feelings about this remarkable but curiously narrow-minded thinker. I see David Oak has raised his hand, so let's hear what he has to say about that first meeting.
I was going to read number 2.
Correct.
Okay, sure. The first day I met him, it was 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and we talked steadily for 13 hours. He was the first man of real importance I had seen. No one else could compare with him. I found him extremely shrewd, intelligent, and altogether remarkable. But my first impressions of him were somewhat confused. I could not quite make him out. I found him, though, absolutely serious about his sex theory, and in his attitude there was nothing trivial to be found. It made a great impression on me, but still I had grave doubts. I told him this, and whenever I did, he always said it was because I had not had enough experience. It was a fact that in those days I had not had enough experience upon which to form a critique. I could see that this sexual theory of his was enormously important to Freud, both personally and philosophically, but I could not make out whether it came from a personal bias or not. So I went away with a doubt in my mind about the whole situation.
Mark, I'm
Great.
sorry to interrupt, but is there any way we can bump up the font a little bit? Mine is
Yeah.
a bit small.
How's that? How does that look, Jack? Okay. All right. Thanks, David. That was very good. So it would not serve the purposes of this course to delve deeply into the complex relationship between these two titans of psychology who saw themselves as father and son. However, there are a few points of contact that will help us to understand the reasons for their eventual separation. The first occurred in 1909 when Freud was invited by G. Stanley Hall, the university president, to give a series of lectures on psychoanalysis. Jung spoke as well and received an honorary degree. It was during this trip that Jung first began detaching psychologically from his mentor, Freud. This occurred following intense communications concerning their individual dreams. So here they are at Clark University. This is Freud on the left. This is Stanley Hall in the center, and Jung as a young man, already losing his hair. Ernst Jones became a very famous biographer of Freud and did great damage to Jung's reputation over the years. Kept it up as long as he was alive. Anyway, so we need to switch back to reading number 3 now. And I see that Margaret is ready to go. Thank you.
Great. In 1909, Freud and I were both invited to Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. We were together daily for about 7 weeks. We analyzed dreams each day, and it was then I got an impression, a fatal one, of his limitations. I had 2 dreams, out of which he could not make head or tail. Of course, I did not mind that, for the very greatest person is going to have that experience with dreams sometime or other. It was just a human limitation, and I would have never taken it as a reason for not going on. On the contrary, I wanted very much to go on. I felt myself to be his son. Then something happened which put a stop to it.
Okay, thank you. So one of the things that strikes me in the BBC interview we began the first class with was the respectful way that Jung spoke about Freud, even years after their breakup. When John Freeman asked him to share some of Freud's dreams with his audience, Jung declined, saying that they had been shared in confidence. This next quotation offers another case of his circumspection. Lisa Kay is going to read this one, number 4.
Freud had a dream on an important theme which I cannot mention. I analyzed it and said there was more to be said if he would give me some points about his private life. He looked at me with a peculiar expression of suspicion in his eyes and said, I could tell you more, but I can't risk my authority. Then I knew further analysis was impossible because he put authority above truth. I said I would have to stop there, and I never asked him again for material. You must understand that I speak here quite objectively, but I must include this experience with Freud because it is the most important factor of my relation with him. He could, can you raise it up a little bit, Mark?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Thank you. He could not bear any criticism whatsoever.
A fatal flaw. Thank you. For Jung, truth was his highest professional and personal goal. He refused to place authority above truth, no matter who the person involved was. This was the fundamental reason behind his unwillingness to follow in Freud's footsteps any further. At first, though, he kept this to himself. Other interactions with Freud were soon to validate his decision. And Elizabeth is ready to read number 5 for me. Thank you. Oh, you're muted, Elizabeth.
Unmute yourself, Elizabeth.
Sorry about that.
Yeah,
Thank
not
you.
a problem.
Thanks.
On my way back from America, I had a dream that was the origin of my book on the psychology of the unconscious, later known as Symbols of Transformation. In those times, I had no idea of the collective unconscious. I thought of the conscious as of a room above, with the unconscious as a cellar underneath, then the earth wellspring, that is the body, sending up the instincts. These instincts tend to disagree with our conscious ideals, so we keep them down. That is the figure I'd always used for myself. And then came this dream, which I hope I can tell you without being too personal.
So I don't know whether you can see this book or not. This is the Symbols of Transformation. That's the rewritten text that he wrote. You can see the size of it. It is dense and it is packed with mythological and symbolic interpretations. This is the book that broke their relationship wide open. Here's the way Jung described this seminal dream that he had later in 1925. Who we got now? Oh, Alan. Yes, sir.
I dreamed that I was in a medieval house, a big, complicated house, with many rooms, passages, and stairways. I came in from the street and went down into a vaulted Gothic room, and from there into a cellar. I thought to myself that now I was at the bottom. But then I found a square hole. With a lantern in my hand, I peeped down this hole and saw stairs leading further down, and down these I climbed. They were dusty stairs, very much worn, and the air was sticky, the whole atmosphere very uncanny. I came to another cellar, this one of very ancient structure, perhaps Roman, and again there was a hole through which I could look down into a tomb filled with prehistoric pottery, bones, skulls. As the dust was undisturbed, I thought I had made a great discovery. There I woke up.
I think that should be then, but I'll have to check that. Thanks, Alan. So Jung was intrigued and mystified at the same time. He was fairly sure that the cellar represented the unconscious, but couldn't understand why it was a medieval house. This apparently remained a mystery to him for quite some time. He was particularly perplexed by the image of something existing underneath the two cellars. What he had seen seemed to be the remains of prehistoric man. What did that mean? And why was there a strongly impersonal feeling about the dream? As was their custom, Jung shared the contents of his medieval house dream with Freud. Ominously, his interpretation didn't ring true to Jung. Okay, Hangame, thank you very much. Number 7, I'm going to give you 8 as well in a minute, okay? Thank you.
Freud said that dream meant that there were certain people associated with me whom I wanted dead and buried under 2 cellars. But I thought the meaning was entirely elsewhere, though I could not make it out.
Okay. Involuntarily, Jung began to make fantasies about it, although he knew nothing at the time about the principle of fantasizing in order to bring up unconscious material. He was just doing it by instinct. He came up with the idea of conducting an excavation. This prompted him to read about excavations currently underway in Mesopotamia. Then he came across a multi-volume work called Mythology and Symbolism, which was written between 1810 and 1823 by Friedrich Kreuzer, which he read at top speed. This left him feeling bewildered. Okay, Hangame, number 8 then.
It seemed to me I was living in an insane asylum of my own making. I went about with all these fantastic figures, centaurs, nymphs, satyrs, gods, and goddesses, as though they were patients and I was analyzing them. I read a Greek or Negro myth as if a lunatic were telling me his anamnesis.
Mm-hmm.
I lost myself in puzzling what it could possibly mean.
Okay, so that anamnesis is a tricky word that you probably don't run into unless you are a doctor. It's a preliminary case history of a medical or psychiatric patient. Anyway, okay. So Jung's exit from the Burke-Holtzley to private practice out of his home coincided with a shift in his research interests to the study of mythology, folklore, and religion. He soon acquired a vast private library of scholarly works. His inquiries ultimately culminated in the book I just showed you, Transformations and Symbols of the Libido, which was published in 2 volumes in 1911 and 12. And we should note, and this is a point that Belinda was making last week, that the end of the 19th century saw an explosion of scholarship in the new disciplines of comparative religion and ethnopsychology. Primary texts were collected and translated for the first time, then being subjected to historical scholarship. Max Muller's 50-volume Sacred Books of the East was one of the first of this type. Jung possessed an almost complete set in his own library. In the midst of his mythological research, Jung came upon an article by an American woman named Miss Frank Miller, who had studied for a time under Theodore Flournoy at the University of Geneva. It was titled Some Instances of Subconscious Creative Imagination. His heavily annotated copy of this essay supports his belief that it acted as a catalyzer upon all the material he had gathered to date. He was subsequently to structure his own book around her fantasies. Okay, so Leslie Alpert is ready to read number 9. Thank you very much.
I saw in Miss Miller a person who, like myself, had had mythological fantasies and dreams of a thoroughly impersonal character. Their impersonality I readily recognized, as well as the fact that they must come from the lower cellars, though I did not give the name of collective unconscious to them. Can you scroll up a bit, please?
I beg your pardon. Sorry.
That this then is the way the book grew up.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I gotta keep remembering that. While he was working on his book of mythology, Jung was haunted by bad dreams. Dreams had influenced all the important changes and concepts in his life. In this specific case, his dreams all pointed to a coming break with Freud. And Belinda is going to read this one for us. Number 10.
You have to unmute yourself,
I
Ellen.
just
There you
did.
go. Sorry.
I
Sorry.
just did.
There you
Okay,
go.
number 10. Oops, I'm on the wrong page. Okay. I thought, of course, that he, Freud, would accept the sellers below his cellar, but the dreams were preparing me for the contrary. Freud could see nothing in the book but resistance to the father, and the point in it to which he took the greatest exception was my contention that the libido is split and produces the thing that checks itself. This to him, as a monist, was utter blasphemy. Yeah, wow.
And in this particular case, the word monist is he's single focused. He's got only one idea and he's not entertaining any others. So, libido is a term originally developed by Freud, meaning desire, primarily of a sexual nature. So this is why Jung refers to him as a monist. In Jung's view, libido has a broader meaning of energy, and it takes many forms. To his mind, sexual desire was only one aspect of energy. And I see Jack is ready to read number 11 and 12 when you get to
it. Pardon me. As Jung explains, libido is a desire impulse which is unchecked by any kind of authority, moral or otherwise, or libido, I should say. Libido is appetite in its natural state. From the genetic point of view, it is bodily needs like hunger, thirst, sleep, and sex, and emotional states or effects. The Concept of Libido, Collected Works, Volume 5, Paragraph 194.
Okay, so hang on and we'll get you to do 12 in a minute. For Jung, libido is a general life force encompassing other motivations, such as creativity, spirituality, and intellectual pursuits. He had also seen plenty of evidence in his private practice that libido is capable of counteracting physical and psychological imbalances within a person. Strangely, Freud perceived the psychology of the unconscious as an example of the son resisting his father and questioning his supposedly unimpeachable authority. Jung, by contrast, felt he was simply pursuing his own investigations of the ways the unconscious had revealed itself to consciousness over the course of history. It was this ever-widening gap which abruptly but not entirely unexpectedly led to Jung formally ending both their professional and personal relationships on October 27, 1913. Okay, Jack, number 12, please.
The problem Psychology of the Unconscious, brought to focus in my mind was that of the hero myth in relation to our own times. With the fundamental thesis of the book, namely the splitting of the libido into a positive and negative current, Freud was, as I have said, in utter disagreement. The publishing of the book marks the end of our friendship. Carl Gustav Jung, Introduction to Jungian Psychology, page 27.
Excuse me, can we go back to number 11? That's just a,
Certainly.
I think there's I think it says emotional states or affects, or shouldn't it be effects?
No.
No.
I think it's affects when it's emotional.
Oh, is it? It is affects, because I thought the effects would, because I just thought I'd raise it, but okay.
Yeah, affect there means an emotional state.
Mm.
Right, Mark?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. So, of course, there were other concepts about which they disagreed that contributed to their separation. So the handout that I shared with you on Sunday is a nice handy list. I hope you've all had a chance to read it. I'm not going to go over it right now. I'll leave that to you as homework if you haven't already done it. So here's how A physician in clinical practice at the University of Utah summarized their divergent tendencies. Okay, Sherry or Bill, number 13, please.
Jung was not an obedient son. His own distinct intellectual background, powers of observation, and natural predilections inexorably drew him toward views that Freud's dogma did not abide. Freud had firmly delimited the unconscious psyche as a midden of life's infantile traumas and sexual repressions, a dank cellar of personal pathology. Jung differed. He sensed in the soul not just the refuse of repression, but beneath that undeniable personal layer, deeper healing strata running to yet indeterminate sources.
Now that word midden is an old English word which means a refuse heap, which I think is a very good word for this idea of piling up of all your repressions, throwing them on the garbage heap off to the side or below you so that you no longer have to pay attention to them. So in short order, Jung's followers from all over the world left him and turned to Freud. Without warning, Jung was all on his own. Let's see, who would like to read again for the first time?
Oh,
Linda's going
I'll wait.
to, sure.
I can wait.
Well, go ahead, you're the only
Well, I'll
one on the
read,
list.
perhaps others can think about putting their hands up. Reading number 14. They were told that my book was rubbish and that I was a mystic. And with that, the matter was settled. Suddenly, I found myself completely isolated. This, however disadvantageous it may have been, had also an advantage for me as an introvert. That is, it encouraged the vertical movement of the libido. Cut off from the horizontal movement, which activity in the outside world brings, I was driven to investigate fully the things within myself.
Thank you. This proved to be the defining moment of Jung's life. Rather than feeling hurt and disheartened, he struck off on his own path and within a year had discovered the imaginal realm. Yeah. After completing the psychology of the unconscious, Jung had an especially lucid moment in which he looked back over the path he had traveled to that point. And I see Thomas in Japan is willing to read this for us. So, and I'm asking you to do 16 later in a minute, okay? So you're muted. Oh, there you go.
Okay.
Great.
I found myself asking what I had done after all. I had written a book about the hero. I had explained the myths of past peoples. But what about my own myth? I had to admit I had none. I knew theirs, but none of my own. Nor did anyone else have one today. Moreover, we were without an understanding of the unconscious.
Pretty perceptive. As he noted in his introduction to his extensive revision of this work in 1952, a person without myth is like one uprooted, having no true link with either the past or with the ancestral life which continues within him, or yet with contemporary human society. He realized that he was actually living in an uncertain cloud of theoretical possibilities, which I was beginning to regard with increasing distrust. Okay, Thomas, so here's number 16 as well.
Sorry, Thomas.
So, in the most natural way, I took it upon myself to get to know my myth, and I regarded this as the task of tasks. For, so I told myself, how could I, when treating my patients, make the allowance for the personal factor for my personal equation, which is yet so necessary for a knowledge of the other person? if I was unconscious of it.
Thank you. The study of myth had thus revealed to Jung his own mythlessness. As a result, he resolved to search for his hidden myth, which would clarify his understanding of his so-called personal equation. The self-experiments he then undertook through an exploration of his own fantasy thinking were a direct response to the theoretical questions raised by the research he had performed that led up to the psychology of the unconscious. So what does Jung mean by the phrase personal equation that we came across a minute ago? In 19th and early 20th century science, it referred to the idea that different observers have different reaction times, which can introduce bias when it comes to measurements and observations. William James helped move the concept of the personal equation from astronomy to social science, arguing that theoretical preconceptions and personal knowledge could lead investigators to wildly differing interpretations based largely on their own personal equations. So what are they bringing to the table? Unquestioningly, that's really the question. How well do they know the point of view that they're working out of? Jung adopted the idea in his book called Psychological Types, arguing that in psychology, the personal equation was principally conditioned not by biographical experiences, but by an innate disposition, that is, one's type. In other words, he maintained that the therapist was constrained to view the world from a particular mindset. Well, just to show you, this is the book that he was working on at the same time he was working on the Red Book and for several years afterwards. Another massive tome called Psychological Types, extremely detailed. As reading 15 explained, Jung was keen to discover the nature of his own mindset. Why? So that he could set it aside as best he could in his interactions with his patients in order to understand them as objectively as humanly possible. It was a tall order, one that neither he nor anyone else has ever been able to accomplish fully. But it did lead him to identify 8 types of personalities found in all human beings. This goal arose from his pondering the dissimilar psychologies of Sigmund Freud, who saw sexual desire as the primary motivator of human beings, and Alfred Adler, who highlighted the role of power instead. And in case you haven't seen who Alfred Adler is, there he is. We do not have time to examine their psychologies here, so I've shared another handout with you to highlight 6 of the major points of contention between them. So how did Adler disagree with Freud? This makes interesting reading. I don't know whether you've read any of Adler, but anyway, I'll leave that to you. Suffice it to say that Jung was initially puzzled by the fact that these 2 contemporary psychologies could see humans from such divergent perspectives. He ultimately concluded that his 2 colleagues were exhibiting 2 separate psychological types, and that every therapist should have at least a good working knowledge of his or her own psychological type or personal equation. So I asked the question, what was Jung's psychological type? Curiously, Jung never indicated what specific type he was in his book. He did, however, share his clues of his type in his interview with John Freeman 30 years later. So here is the interchange that I guess Rob is going to read for us. Number 17.
John Freeman, have you concluded what psychological type you are yourself? Carl Jung. Naturally, I have devoted a great deal of attention to that painful question, and reached a conclusion? Well, you see, the type is nothing static. It changes in the course of life, but I most certainly was characterized by thinking. I always thought from early childhood on, and had a great deal of intuition too. And I had a definite difficulty with feeling, and my relation to reality was not particularly brilliant. I was often at variance with the reality of things. Now that gives you all the necessary data for your diagnosis.
So I've never seen anybody actually put things together and give him the specific type. So I went ahead and did it. So you have to be familiar with the psychological types as he has listed them. Now there's 3 sets of them here, but just for the let's just pay attention to Jung's own version in his psychological types. You're either extroverted or introverted. He's the guy that came up with this term. Everybody talks about it nowadays as if it's a perfectly given, fully understood term. Then there's the difference between somebody who's a sensory person or an intuitive person. Thinking and feeling, judging and perceiving. So this handout presents 3 related lists. First, the 8 types that Jung distinguished in psychological types. The next one, the Myers-Briggs type indicator, was created by Isabel Myers with the help of her mother, Catherine Briggs. The resulting book, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, was published in 1962 to great fanfare. By the 1990s, over 1 million individuals were taking the test each year. And lastly, it provides this 3rd section here. A list of the 16 possible combinations of the 4 binary options of Jung and Myers-Briggs. Combining the clues that Jung shared with Freeman with other statements he made over the years, I've concluded that Jung was an introvert, an intuitive, a thinker, and a judger. In short, an INTJ. Right here. So if you're using the Myers-Briggs type, he would be considered reserved, introspective, tough-minded, and scheduling. And Myers is the one that comes up with this term, the mastermind. And I think this is really dead on. I don't think there's any real question about this. So here's how Myers defined the NT. These guys, the NTs, the rationalists. And we'll go back to number 18. This is a bit daunting to read, but
It's Kiersey, not Myers, though. Is that right, Mark?
Yes, that's right. I need to make a note to that myself. Yeah. Who would like to read that one up for us? Jack, thank you so much.
Oh, well, we wade right into it. Analytical and systematic as abstract, theoretical, and intellectual, as complex, competent, and inventive, as efficient, exacting and independent, as logical and technical, and as curious, scientific, and research-oriented. David Kiersey, please understand me. Well, is that volume 2? Temperament, Character, Intelligence, 1998.
Yeah, that's actually the 2nd version of the book.
Okay, yeah. I wasn't sure there what went with what, Mark, but it's okay. You can.
Yeah, so this is the rationalist group of people. They all have characteristics like this. And from all the reading I've done over the past year by and about Carl Jung, I must say that this describes Jung surprisingly accurately. So I'm sure many of you have taken the Myers-Briggs test at some point in the past and already know which four-letter category you typically inhabit. If you haven't, I will include a link to a free version of the test in my email tomorrow. The official Myers-Briggs test for personal growth will set you back $60 US, or at least it would when I wrote these notes, so it may be 70 by now. Anyway. So, in the psychology of the unconscious, Jung carefully distinguished two types of thinking. Based in part on William James's work in psychology, Jung discriminated between what he called directed thinking and fantasy thinking, which is here. So the directed thinking is the kind that we just mentioned as the rational type. So it's verbal and logical, exemplified by science. Thoughts are handled as tools. They're made to serve the purposes of the thinker. The opposite type of thinking is fantasies thinking, which is passive, associative, and imagistic. It's exemplified by mythology. The thoughts are like individuals going about on their own and may even be antagonistic to the ego. This is what he's going to encounter when he starts into the Red Book. Fantasy thinking only occurs once directed thinking has ceased. According to Jung, the ancients lacked a capacity for directed thinking, which was a modern acquisition. The psychology of the unconscious is, in fact, an extended study of fantasy thinking and shows the continued presence of mythological themes in the dreams and fantasies of contemporary individuals. So Jung posited a phylogenetic layer of the unconscious, still present in everyone, which consisted strictly of mythological images. For Jung, myths were symbols of the libido, and they depicted its typical movements. He called his comparative method amplification. So phylogenetic refers to the evolutionary history of a kind of organism, or the history or course of development of something. So they often say, for instance, the development that a person goes through from the moment of birth up until the end of their lives is following the phylogenetic course of human beings. We've all gone through the same thing at some point. So we how do I put it? We're sort of locked in on the railway tracks. We have no way of getting out of that particular pattern. So let's switch back here to number 19. Okay, Leslie Alpert, number 19, please.
The book, Psychology of the Unconscious, begins with a statement about two kinds of thinking that can be observed: intellectual or directed thinking, and fantastic or passive automatic thinking. In the process of directed thinking, thoughts are handled as tools. They are made to serve the purposes of the thinker. While in passive thinking, thoughts are like individuals going about on their own, as it were. Fantastical thinking knows no hierarchy. The thoughts may even be antagonistic to the ego.
This is quite curious. So in each of the binary pairs of types that Jung identified in psychological types, let's just look back here and see. Okay, so the pairs are E and I, extroverted, introverted, sensory, intuitive, etc. One is superior to the other inferior one in every particular individual. you're stronger in one of them than the other. Not to say that you're always that way, but most of the time you tend to be either an extrovert or an introvert. That's where you get your energy. So in an introvert like Jung, his extrovert is less well developed. If he's intuitive, his sensory capabilities are stunted to some degree. In his case, this imbalance is most noticeable in his thinking ability. His directed thinking completely dominated his feelings, which, as we already read, caused him definite difficulty. This also meant that fantasy thinking was alien to him. Only after completing his Psychology of the Unconscious did he come to see that Miss Miller's fantasies had been what he called a carrier of an inferior function, of which I was very little conscious. This was the roundabout way his hidden self chose to introduce him to his inferior function of feeling. It was guiding him to the world of fantasy thinking, which had been quite repulsive to him up to that point in his life. Okay, Lisa, let's see what you think of number 20. A bit long, but it's an important one.
I was in my consciousness an active thinker, accustomed to subjecting my thoughts to the most rigorous sort of direction, and therefore fantasizing was a mental process that was directly repellent to me. As a form of thinking, I held it to be altogether impure, a sort of incestuous intercourse, thoroughly immoral from an intellectual standpoint. Permitting fantasy in myself had the same effect on me as would be produced on a man if he came into his workshop and found all the tools flying about doing things independently of his will. It shocked me, in other words, to think of the possibility of a fantasy life in my own mind. It was against all the intellectual ideals I had developed for myself. And so great was my resistance to it that I could only admit the fact in myself through the process of projecting my material into Miss Miller's. Or to put it even more strongly, passive thinking seemed to me such a weak and perverted thing that I could only handle it through a diseased woman.
Wow. So, because he had repressed his fantasy thinking ability so effectively and for so long, it had become semi-morbid and contaminated by material from the collective unconscious. Only by analyzing the mythological material he presented in Psychology of the Unconscious could he assimilate the Miller side of himself. While he had done so largely unconsciously, this was the first step he took in reconnecting with his inferior fantasy function. Okay, so we need just about 3 or 4 more readers and then we're done. Okay, Elizabeth, please, number 21.
Sorry, I keep forgetting. The material in Psychology of the Unconscious could not fail to make a great impression on me. I mean the mythological material which I was working. One of the most important influences was that I elaborated Miss Miller's morbidity into myth in a way satisfactory to myself. And so I assimilated the Miller side of myself, which did me much good. To speak figuratively, I found a lump of clay, turned it into gold, and put it in my pocket. I got Miller into myself and strengthened my fantasy power by the mythological material. Then I continued my active thinking, but with hesitancy. It seemed as if my fantasy was going away from the material.
Okay, thank you. So, in other words, what he's talking about is when he returned to his directive thinking, he lost his grip on fantasy thinking, because you can't have both at the same time. This was only natural given the comparative strength of the two. He realized that he needed to somehow strike a balance between the two. Well, that's number 22. How about you, Jack?
You want me to read 22, Mark?
I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Now, at this time, inasmuch as I was actively thinking, I had to find some way to reserve myself, so to speak, and to pick up the passive side of my mental life. This, as I have said, a man dislikes to do because he feels so helpless. He can't quite manage it and feels inferior. It is as though he were a log being tossed about in a stream, and so he gets out of it as soon as possible. He repudiates it because it is not pure intellect. Even worse than that, it might be a feeling. He feels himself a victim of all of that, and yet he must deliver himself over to it in order to get at his creative power. Since my anima or soul had been definitely awakened by all that mythological material I'd been working with, I was now forced to give attention to that other side, to my unconscious inferior side, in other words. This sounds very easy, I know, but it is a statement a man hates to make. Introduction to Jungian Psychology, etc.
He was really struggling, let's face it. Consequently, Jung began to search for a method to connect with his fantasy thinking on a regular basis. He needed to temporarily unplug from his enormously strong directed thinking. But how? The answer turned out to involve setting aside a certain time each day and then voluntarily ridding himself of his thoughts. Beginning in December 1913 and for the next several years, Jung devoted his evenings to the exploration of his inferior function of fantasy thinking. He continued to function in his daytime activities without any evident impairment. He maintained a busy professional practice, seeing on average 5 patients a day, while his family life was full of interactions with his wife Emma, his 5 children, and their many friends. He lectured, he wrote, and remained active in professional associations. In addition, he gave obligatory service as an officer in the Swiss Army and served on active duty over several extended periods during each of these years. Only after dinner would he retire to his home office and consciously try to stop directing his thoughts. It was only by maintaining this balance between day and night that he was able to find sanity. As he says, whoever does the one and does without the other, you may call sick, since he is out of balance. All right, so we're almost done here. Number 23 for Bill or Sherry.
My scientific question went, what would happen if I switched off consciousness? I noticed from dreams that something stood in the background, and I wanted to give this a fair chance to come forward. One submits to the necessary conditions as in a mescaline experiment, so that it emerges.
Okay. He was most eager to study what surfaced when he emptied consciousness and allowed whatever was in the unconscious to spontaneously rise to the surface. We got a couple of big quotes here. I'm going to read this one myself. What I did then in order to get at this inferior unconscious side of me was to make at night an exact reversal of the mental machinery I'd used in the day. That is to say, I turned all my libido within in order to observe the dreams that were going on. It has been said by Leon Daudet that dreams do not only appear in the sleep, but having a life of their own, they continue also during the daytime, below the level of consciousness. This is, of course, not a new idea, but one that cannot be emphasized too often. One is able to catch dreams best at night because one is then passive. However, with a dementia praecox or schizophrenic patient, it can be observed how the dreams come to the surface even in the daytime, because these people are passive all the time, so to speak, and simply turn themselves over to the dream life. A thinking man's mind is active during the day, but no dreams can be caught in this state. By assuming a passive attitude at night, while at the same time pouring the same stream of libido into the unconscious that one has put into work in the day, the dreams can be caught and the performances of the unconscious observed. But it cannot be done by just lying down on a couch and relaxing. It has to be done by a definite giving over of the libido in full sum to the unconscious. I trained myself to do this. I gave all my libido to the unconscious in order to make it work. And in this way, I gave the unconscious a chance. The material came to light and I was able to catch it in flagrante. So that's what he was doing when the Red Book started to happen. This strategy was only partially successful. It wasn't until he combined it with his earlier interest in excavation that he broke through to the imaginal realm. He did this by visualizing himself digging a hole in the earth. At that point, he switched from passive witnessing to active engagement. And Alan is going to read this particular thing, which is the last quote of the night, number 25. Thank you, sir.
He had broken through a barrier. A method had been found and consolidated. Trusting his soul's vision, he entered into an exchange with the figures that emerged, listened to them, and allowed himself to be instructed. This became his via regia, or royal road, to the imaginal world. The fantasies in the black books may be understood as a type of dramatized thinking in pictorial form. As one reads them, the impact of Jung's mythological studies becomes clear. In these entries, Jung was both a participant and scribe of his inferior imaginal dramas, bearing witness to what he had encountered. The first phase of his understanding may be characterized as a religious quest, an effort to recover a sense of meaning in his life. This is from Samu Shamdasani towards visionary science in the Black Books.
So to clarify the technique that Jung developed and then shared with his patients and colleagues, I distributed a summary of what he called active imagination. This document here. I will leave it to you to digest this document at your leisure. So he encouraged many of his patients to undertake this process of active imagination onto somehow or other describe what they experienced, either by writing it down or by painting it or by sculpting it or dancing it, whatever form they were comfortable with. It was important to make them concrete. So let me see where I'm at now. Stop sharing and finally see who's here. Ah, there we go. I feel like I've been trapped in a little tiny world with only 4 other people.
So, Mark, there are a couple of questions in the chat, and
great.
Thomas has his hand up. Can you see the chat?
I can if I click on the word chat, I think.
There are some comments
There
too, so thanks to those who commented, but maybe we should just address the questions. So there's a question from Alan. Can you see that one?
Yes. Is Jung suggesting that not only the physical body, but also the shape of the human brain and thus mind is evolving on a collective level? If evolution is driven by needs for survival, does this need also drive the evolution of the human species? Does humanity today have capacities of thought that former generations could never know or express? The answer is yes. So on all 3. So yes, the brain, the human mind and the brain are evolving collectively as well as individually. And he said, for instance, that in the Middle Ages, for instance, they didn't have directed thinking as an option the way we have. So we have evolved in significant ways over a period of time. But that's not to say that, that last question, does humanity today have capacities of thought that former generations could never know or express? I think that's the answer is yes, but I think it's a mistake to feel superior to them and to dismiss the capacities that they had in those days. I think we need both. We need to go back and make sure that we have access to the kinds of information gathering and intuitive knowledge that people of many, many centuries ago had. Anyway, how did Miss Miller become diseased? Oh, I have to say I can't remember the details. Sorry, Belinda. I'll research that and get back to you tomorrow by email. Does this relate to the modern concept of mindfulness? Possibly. Depends on what kind of mind you're referring to. If you're familiar with the right brain, left brain controversies, if mindfulness is a return to the right brain, I think it does refer to that. I think that's what Jung is really suggesting, is that we need to have both of them working, functioning equally, have access to each of them whenever we need them. But in the West at the moment, for instance, there's a heavy concentration on the left brain. And in his case, to the exclusion of the right brain. So he had to take baby steps and learn what this other brain was, how it operated. And he was scandalized by it at first. Any other thoughts here that I need to address? Okay, Jack's point about Adler is very good. Heather, when I was teaching high school, I simplified the difference between affect and effect for students as the former being connected to feelings, affection, and effect as a change. What affected you? I effected a difference in thought by reading, which really affected me. That was effective. It affected me. Very clever. I like that. Okay, good. Okay, so now we've got two people with hands up. First Thomas and then Jack. There you are.
Okay, there we go. I just have the comment that what the opening description of Jung's dream of the Gothic house, the lowest cellar, where all the bones and that debris was of the ancient civilizations, now was very much explained by his last his last few readings, where he had realized that he had completely neglected the libido of his fantasy world. So,
and as we'll see in a later talk, he suggests that each of us is 2 million years old, that we have the ability to touch that part of ourselves that has had all that experience and call that up. So anyway, good point. Yeah. Okay, Jack.
Muted.
Where did you go, Jack?
Oh, he turned his hand off, but he didn't turn his mic on. There you go.
Okay. I think Freud was completely out to lunch on his interpretation of Jung's dream. So I agree with Jung that Freud didn't have a clue, because he was so narrow-minded when it came to his psychology. But I wanted to say, Mark, that regarding Alan's interesting question, I have a slightly different understanding of it than you do. Can I just share what I think? I think it's a little
Absolutely.
I think it's a little more subtle. Jung believed that we inherited the archetype. They were there, stamped from the beginning. What we could do, what humanity could do over time, was to get a better understanding of them. But it wasn't guaranteed. At least that's my understanding of what Jung is saying, because he was so heavily invested in the individual that he said it was only to the extent, at least I understand him this way, only to the extent that the individual did the work of integrating the unconscious and the conscious mind, would humanity as a whole evolve. So I don't think it was, so it's a little more subtle. I don't think it was guaranteed. I think it was more conditional, if you like, in Jung's thinking. It was to the extent that we were willing to go into the shadow side, do the work, explore the unconscious, and that was individual work. And if all individuals did that work, then I think Jung would agree, yes, humanity can grow by leaps and bounds. But I don't think it was necessarily guaranteed. And I understand that, as those archetypes are there, and we all discover them in dreams and visions and myths. And by the way, Jung greatly influenced Joseph Campbell, the great mythologist, and The Hero with 1,000 Faces was largely influenced by Jung's work on the hero. Anyway, thank you.
So I think you're raising a very good point, Jack, that Ken Wilber, my friend in the States, had a nice idea, or a nice way of expressing what you're talking about. He said that we co-create the future, right? It depends to a large degree on how willing we are to engage in the actual practices that are required for us to evolve. If we just sit here and twiddle our thumbs, nothing is going to happen. But if we do actively engage with the shadow and with the anima or the animus, and become aware of the archetypes and try to at least listen to the advice that they're giving us, then we have the capacity to evolve. But if we do nothing, we don't have any capacity whatsoever. So you're nodding. I think that's fair to say. Yeah. Okay. All right, Bill.
Yeah, so I was just wondering if you knew of if there's been a cross-referencing or a correlation between the personality traits, whether it's Jung or the other one, and like stages of development or stages of psychosocial progress as we go through life, like from Erik Erikson. Like, so if you take a specific type of person and put them through these stages, to have an analysis of like how a different type of person might go through these stages, or what might be particularly challenging to people who fit these types as they in a particular stage, and if you had any information or knowledge.
Don't have an awareness of that particular thing. I think Jung would probably say that for the most part, you're going to stay an introvert for the rest of your life, no matter what you go through, unless you actively work on developing your extroversion. But to a certain extent, there is like a glass ceiling that you cannot go beyond that. It's you're hardwired in a certain way, is what he's finding. And I think the beauty of his contribution is he actually helps us to make those distinctions conscious to ourselves, so that we can start looking for those evidences as to what type we may be. So it's a matter of differentiating our inner life in a way that we haven't in the past. But I don't know that, I'm not quite sure how they would intersect with the stages of life. That's not something I have thought through, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, I majored in psychology, and I was always disturbed by how separate these theories were. Like one should never touch the other. And when we're going over this, I was like, it'd be very interesting to just have some understanding of how being a certain type might influence, or how you went through various stages that are described in another theory. Just that cross-pollination between thinkers and observers.
Well, to me, one of the people who's done the best job at doing that kind of correlation is Ken Wilber. And I know you have one or two of his books already, so we could have a discussion about that offline, for instance.
Sure.
I think you'd find it interesting to spend time with him on that type of question. Okay, Thomas, what's up?
Yes, well, I was reacting to Jack's comment, which seemed to put a lot of responsibility on the development or the evolution of society on the individual. And this, to me, I just said, yep, that's just a reconfirmation of this Western way of thinking about individualism and the sacredness of your individuality and in the social and everything else that we have in our society.
But at the same time, I think we need to take into consideration how strong the societal forces are around us, how limited the views are that we have to struggle with. So I mean, I'm thinking of what it's going to be like 500 years from now. Living as a Baha'i is going to be much more supported by the society around us. Here we have to sort of carry it around in our heads and hope to find a role model among the community somewhere as to how to live on a day-to-day basis facing the kinds of difficulties we are right now. You see what I'm saying?
I agree 100% with that.
Okay.
So, Mark, there are some more comments in the chat
Oh, are
you
there?
might want to
Oh.
address now. You could start with Belinda's comment, and there are a couple more there as well.
Okay, the one about the Miss Miller?
No,
Oh,
she
no,
talks about
okay.
in matters of healing, the arts always work. And then she talks underneath, there's a comment under that.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, Belinda. Do you want to flesh out some of the things that you've added here?
Oh,
The
not
arts
really.
always work?
I've seen that and experienced it. It's something David has commented on many times, that when you introduce the arts to a person and get them going, it always helps. And the other thing, the next comment I had, I'm not sure that people of the past lack the ability to engage in directed thinking. We might not be able to recognize it when we see it in the past. But there's a lot that could be said about that. I think we tend to underestimate what the people of the past could and did do. I'm coming down to my last comment here. Everything is related. I have a thing called the 7 words. Everything is related. Everything changes. Pay attention. So that's what that's connecting to. But the thing is, what I have noticed studying the past is that human beings always do everything, but together. From the simplest thing, hunting for today's meal, making tools, thinking about the structure of the universe. We always do these things with each other. I don't know how to better, more emphatically say that. So I'm finished now. Thank you.
Okay. I'm curious to know what Lynette is thinking of tonight's session.
I have a comment, maybe not.
Okay. Go ahead, Janet.
I just want to follow up on what Belinda's just said. I think, Belinda, if I can phrase it right, you said that when you bring in the arts always help. Is that what you said? You was about the comment about the arts.
Yeah, pretty much. I think I was being trying to simplify. When someone goes into therapy, if the therapist encourages them to do something artistic, whether it's musical or painting or dancing or whatever, it always helps that person heal. That's what I'm trying to say.
So I want to thank you, Belinda, for making that clear. I just wanted to say that I've been working I'm an expressive arts therapist, and I was asked to do some workshops in a dementia care home close to where I live, just down the road. So I wasn't sure I wanted to do it, but I did it, and it's ended up being an incredible experience for the last year and a half. And I'm doing a presentation on it tomorrow on online. It's through OYATA, which is the Ontario Expressive Arts Therapy Association. The acronym is OEATA. So the talk is called Expressive Art, EXA and Dementia, the Big Surprise. So EXA being Expressive Arts Therapy. So it really is my big surprise was how much the arts how much the elderly people could do in the arts and how much I enjoyed working with them. I was completely surprised by it, by the and the amazing imagery and memories that came back to people living with dementia and dying of dementia. What kind of things would come up through the arts? So it's intermodal expressive arts therapy using dance, theater, singing, visual arts, clay, active imagination, figurines, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll be doing that tomorrow from 4 till 6 Pacific time and from 7 till 9 Eastern time. It's online. So OEATA, OYATA is the website name for the, you go to the events page.
Please send that out as an email to the whole list, or somebody
just
do
send-
that, please.
Sorry, Janet, if you send it to me, I will make sure it's part of the message that goes out tomorrow morning.
Okay, yeah.
Great.
I'll send it to you tonight, Mark.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And Lynette, did you have any thoughts that you'd like to share at this point?
Well, I guess one of the things that I reflect on in terms of the active imagination, Jung was very careful to say that that isn't always advantageous to all people. That if one is going to delve into that depth, one has to be sure one has a very strong ego to start with. And many people, the ego is quite fragmentary or quite undeveloped, and that would really be dangerous for them to go there. But if one has an advanced sense of one's psychology and as he said, a really strong ego that you start with that, then it can be very fulfilling and very revealing to take a look at those kind of depths. And Jung was an amazing adventurer when it came to the psychology in the world at a time when nobody else supported him. I think that's important to remember that. We now have therapists to kind of come along with us, but he had no one. And I always admire his courage and self-dedication.
Hear, hear. Okay, Heather, the last comment or question goes to you.
Thank you. And hello, everyone. I have put a couple of book references in the chat, should you be interested, but there's no way I could have expressed this in typing in time. So I thought I would just speak it. I was really interested in the idea that somebody talked about whether there had been kind of interrelationship between these various theorists. And then Bill commented, probably rightly, that he thought not, because I too did my first undergraduate degree in psychology, although it was a very long time ago, probably around the same time as Bill, since he and I are the same age. But having said that, from the faith point of view, from the Baha'i faith point of view, Hooper Dunbar speaks in his book, is it called Forces of Our Time? Something of that nature anyway, about emanations. And one of the things I have wondered about, people may have comments next week or whenever it's appropriate, is this idea of the energy that was released by the revelation into the world. And so even when we can't necessarily perceive the cross-pollination or the cross-fertilization of ideas, perhaps in these areas like psychology and others, I think it's possible that all of them are in some way, no, I'll rephrase that, probable, that all of these disciplines and these individuals were picking up on the energy released by Baha'u'llah into the world, so that even though they might not on the surface appear connected, at a kind of an esoteric level, there couldn't help but be connection. I hope that's clear. Thank you.
I think you're right. I felt that very strongly. Yeah. Well, folks, I hope you found tonight to be helpful or interesting or whatever. We have set things up now for us to start getting Jung to the Red Book. I know it's been a long lead up, but I think you needed to know the background. Here he is now operating all on his own, facing his unconscious with no help whatsoever from anyone else. What a gutsy guy. Anyway, he makes a fantastic contribution by what he finds when he gets there, as we shall see.
He is such an amazing pioneer into the human mind, eh, Mark? Just unbelievable. He stands out. He towers above everybody else, really, in some ways, doesn't he?
He certainly does. Well,
Thank
folks,
you. Thank you,
let's have a
Mark.
good, okay. Good night,
Thank you very
everybody.
much.
We shall see
Night,
you
everybody.
later.
See you later, maybe.
Bonsoir.
Bye.
Maybe.
Everybody's
night.
saying good night. Okay.
Good
Night.
night.